All right, welcome back, folks. My name is Lisa Bates. I'm an associate professor here in the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and of course, I love the census. I love the census so much. I once spent several months inside the confidential research data center, a windowless, internetless room, so that I could use census data to track Hurricane Katrina recovery in New Orleans. Just one of the many really critical uses of the data products that are derived from our census. We're going to turn to a panel now. We've got folks who have really deep expertise in specific outreach and connection to communities who are so critical to our count of the census. Communities often underrepresented and whose voices are not heard sufficiently in our democracy, and whose participation in the census then becomes so critical. So I'm going to give each panelist a moment to introduce themselves, their organization and the work that they do, and then we will begin to talk a little bit about what we can share with everyone here about some of the challenges and also some of the successes that we anticipate in doing this outreach. So let's take it away here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hello. Good to see you. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Renata Ray Mayer, and my pronouns are she, her, queen. And I am the Census Equity Manager at PALF, which is the Portland African American Leadership Forum. And we are a proud member of the We Count Oregon Coalition. So very seriously, my role is to make sure that every Black Oregonian has relevant information about the census, that they know how and when to take the census, and ultimately that they get counted. And then a little bit about our organization, PALF. We are an all-inclusive Black-led organization, and we are advocating for a city where every person of African descent have the rights and resources that they need to live in a thriving and connected community. So that rights and resources piece is a big part of the census. I'm here to make sure every Black person gets counted. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Gustavo Morales. I'm the executive director of Uvocry. Uvocry is a nonprofit organization that's based in Eastern Oregon. We serve 8 counties, which is geographically half the state, with an emphasis in Malheur, Morrow, and Umatilla counties. In our organization, we have 43 programs under the umbrellas of immigration, education, healthcare, built environment, and community and economic development. We are very honored and privileged to be here, and our work in being able to leverage the social capital and the leadership capacity of community members, specifically those that are underserved and underrepresented, is what has made us a great asset for being able to engage in census work.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chi Wen, she, her, hers, please. I am proud to be your co-chair of the Oregon Complete Count Committee, along with Representatives Andrea Salinas, who is unable to join us today. But we are a really strong body of over 35 leaders between community organizations, elected officials, representing both bipartisan and service providers. We are made up of 6 different subcommittees that are content confidentiality, media communications, community outreach, regional and local government, tribal and native, as well as social service providers. Some of you actually are already in this room, and I'd like to tell a quick story of why I'm doing this work. I always like to start with a Brene Brown moment of vulnerability, is the fact that I came to the US when I was 8, and Oregon welcomed myself and my family to be our home. But what I can admit is that ever since I came here, I have never once been able to fill out the census. And if I can't do it, I'm usually the one that does it for my whole family. We are probably represented in that, what Jason shared with you, that earlier story about the African American man. So for a fact, we know we have a lot on the line, and for that, I'm here to earn my karma points by working double duty to make sure that we ensure that all Oregonians, that are present here in Oregon, are counted safely and accurately for 2020.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Pacifico Kogan, and I'm the Director of Community Affairs for Children's Institute. And Children's Institute is a statewide policy and advocacy organization focused on ensuring that all children in Oregon receive the high-quality early life experiences, programs, and services all children need to thrive and succeed in school and life. And our focus really primarily is on children who have experienced the greatest disparities and who are historically underserved. So those are children of color, children with disabilities and delays, children who live in poverty, children who are English language and dual language learners, as well as children who live in geographically remote or rural areas of the state. And these groups, it's interesting because kids cannot advocate for themselves in the census, correct? Like they can't fill out their census forms. And also, I'm going to butcher this quote, but we all contain multitudes. So there are children who live in families where their parents are disabled and their parents are veterans and they live in Eastern Oregon and they're monolingual speakers. That can be all one family, right? So you have one family that is now in 4 to 5 hard to count communities. So when children cannot advocate for themselves and if their parents also experience barriers to be able to count themselves and their families, we are at an incredible loss. And when children do not get what they need, we know what happens in our society. And to be frank, Oregon is, I believe now, the 48th, we're the 48th in terms of ranking for graduation in the United States, for high school graduation. And if we don't address those issues and problems and concerns beginning at birth in those critical 0 to 5 years, our children will not experience success, not only in the classroom but in life. But no child who lives in this country and in this state, regardless of how they got here, should be consigned to a future that relegates them to not be able to experience the fullness of their potential and their success, right? So children must be counted and their families must be counted.
It's on. Tots Maui, Inam Winnect West, Shana, McConville, Radford, Inam Wailapu, Nimipu, Ka Yahweh. Good morning, my name is Shana McConville Radford, and I'm a tribal partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. I cover both Oregon and Idaho, and I'm a citizen of the Umatilla tribes. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for providing this opportunity to talk a little bit more about my role and the Census Bureau's role in our relationships with tribal governments. So currently, as maybe you've already heard, we undercounted American Indians, Alaska Natives by 4.9%, which is far too much. So my goal is to really, and a lot of our goals is to get that down. And so our goal is to get 100% count. And hopefully I can help you understand maybe some of the barriers and some of the challenges. So thank you for having me.
Good morning. My name is Esperanza Turvalon Garrett, and I am the founder and CEO of Dancing Hearts Consulting. We're a Black, Indigenous, women of color firm based in Southern Oregon that works with social justice organizations and philanthropy to solve some of the biggest challenges of our time. I'm also very honored to be the campaign manager for the We Count Oregon campaign. We're a hard to count campaign made up of 13 people of color led organizations who already have community connections to hard to count communities. We are going to reach out to about 1 million hard to count folks over the next, 8 months or so. And we are really excited to be here, a couple of our partners here at the table. I want to be clear that we don't make this work happen on our own. We're so honored and grateful to have our partner organizations recently bring on census engagement coordinators, managers. And I would like for those folks to stand now and be recognized for the hard work that they are going to do over this next period of time. CECs, please stand. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and ask my team to stand up. Mandy Yepa, our communications director, and Precious Edmonds, our administrative coordinator. We're really excited about this work, mostly because we know that race and gender and justice have to be central to an equitable count here in Oregon, and we lead with a set of values that are clear, that the census is one step in ensuring that our people have power and dignity and voice. Thanks.
So I think we can see just from these very brief introductions why it is that Director Thompson said that community partnerships and outreach are so critical to making the census work. And all of our panelists have a really deep and specific expertise that I think we can learn from here. So I've asked folks to share a little bit about what are the really specific kinds of barriers and challenges that you see for the communities that you're most focused on and have knowledge about.
So we work with the Black community, as you know, and we are all inclusive. So our Black includes African Americans, all people of African descent, Afro-Latinx, et cetera, et cetera. And two of the biggest concerns when it comes to Black participation is privacy and confidentiality. Black people want to know that the information that they give out won't be used to target them. And that's a very real and valid concern. So there's a big trust issue. That's one of our main challenges. Secondly, we know that Oregon is home to a thriving Black immigrant population. I'm a South African immigrant myself, and even though the citizenship question won't be on the census, the damage has already been done. Folks are already concerned about giving out the information about their citizenship status, right? So again, that's a trust issue. And then historically, Black men have been the most undercounted group, and we need to find ways to change that. That's very troubling, and it's something that we don't have the time to allow to keep on happening. Because if Black Oregonians don't get counted, we don't just lose out on federal funding, which we know is $3,200 per person. We lose out on political representation. And I'm here to make sure that Black people get represented and that they feel reflected in political leadership. Thank you.
So I have a unique position in my organization where I get to work with government leaders, elected officials, and more importantly, work with grassroots community members. And so we're able to see directly how systems directly impacts community members, and oftentimes the efforts to change those systems, on whether they be intentional or unintentional, how they can have some consequences for rural communities. The urban-rural divide is a real thing. And a lot of folks often argue, what does Portland-centric, Salem-centric, Willamette Valley-centric work mean for 3/4 of the state, which is rural? And even taking it a little bit further, when we start dividing up the demographics within our rural communities, Umatilla and Malheur counties have some of the most diverse geographic populations in the nation. And I'm not gonna get these mixed up, but we have the largest Basque population and the largest Japanese population. One of them is in the state of Oregon and the other one's in the nation. But we don't often talk about that because of just sheer numbers. And so when we're looking at census work, it's often utilitarianism, greater good. But oftentimes, those who have the power, we need to be able to shift and be able to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, just because of the sheer numbers. And if, as a society, we can't begin to set that precedent, it's gonna make it very difficult for us to engage diverse populations to see the value of work, because the stereotype between the grassroots community member and the perception of government isn't a positive one. Even though as a state of Oregon, we consider ourselves more progressive, in the eyes of the community, state government and federal government is the same thing. There's no distinction. And us who are involved in the work, we can talk about it, we can share that, but for grassroots community, it's not. And so the best way for us to do that is show community and be involved with community, which is often easier said than done. Coming back to a point that was made earlier by my colleague here is the fear. The citizenship question was put on and had so much media that it scared the heck out of people. Now that it's not, people don't know that it's not on there. And so there's a lot of education that needs to be done to let people know that that's not gonna be an identifying factor. But because that fear has grabbed root, it's gonna be really difficult to pull that root out and then help inform and help get people connected to the value of the census, because it's dollars, it's resources that our communities need. And if we don't get access to the resources, I fear that the disparities we see are gonna continue to exacerbate.
So there was a recent study that was put together that names and calls out the 2020 census barriers, attitudes, and motivators. And 1 in 4 people fear that their response will be somehow used against them. Other statistics that I like to highlight in my recent talks as I'm touring around, again, it's all volunteer-based, is what I want to emphasize about these leaders that are coming together on a monthly basis at OCCC, is that we're all volunteers, and The statistics that I want to call out is that 41% identify in the Asian Pacific Islander community. So when I'm not volunteering with OCCC, what pays the bills for me is that I'm the executive director of APANO. We're the statewide policy advocacy organization that represents API community. Now you see why there's this heavy investment organizationally for us to play and have a key role in ensuring that the API count is accurate, fair, and safe. 39% of that same study have low English proficiency. 34% are born outside of the US. 32% have less than a high school diploma, and 31% reside in hard-to-count neighborhoods. I know I sit with a panel of really strong experts in the hard-to-count community, but I just want to highlight the fact that those statistics nationally, the study was conducted, what it means here in Oregon. There's a huge digital, linguistic, and economic divide we all have touched on. But for the numbers, 1 in 4 Oregonian identifies as a person of color. 1 of 10 Oregonians are foreign-born. 1 in 4 live in multi-generation, multi-family households. And greater than a third are renters. So I come at it from a different angle too, is that previous to this, I was an entrepreneur, and usually when we just make business decisions, we go to the data, right? And my key concern for the census and the noise that the citizenship question caused was that it distorts data, and fear creates a fake baseline. Outside of being a business leader, I've also, in my profile, if you see in the agenda, I've served as a city councilor. I joke and say I'm a recovering city councilor, but I got to serve on the advisory board that administers the HUD grants for a county that grows in population 2 busloads a day. And constantly, we were faced with asks that were in 4 billion plus asks, when we only had 2 billion to give out. So to me, I go to the data. We have to make decisions that are data-driven, and if the numbers are cooked, the books are cooked, then we can't really stay ahead of the challenge of ensuring that our communities are well taken care of. So that's why I like to bring the quantitative side of the perspective to what this panel is going to be able to breathe life into the faces behind the numbers for you today.
So critical, and I thank you for that, because I think we often do get stuck in the imagination, or not those of us who live here, but we know that others looking into Oregon don't see all of that diversity, and they don't see the challenges that we see here. And I know, Danielle, you can speak to that very clearly.
Oh, I hope so, but perhaps not, but I will try. I would say, well, in terms of the 0 to 5 community, I think there are 2 huge distinct communities that we don't really think about, right? So in Oregon, as in many other states, our rate of houselessness is growing significantly, right? And when we see homeless people on the street, we don't necessarily think of their children. But there are houseless children in families. And what happens to those kids? And a lot of those kids actually go to Head Start programs, or relief nursery programs, or other government or publicly subsidized programs. And so where will they get counted? If you live in a homeless shelter, like, do your parents feel comfortable counting you there, or are they scared that their children might get taken away from them, right? And so that's a population that is often not thought of and is a nexus of being a child and being houseless. And so those are 2 hard-to-count communities. And I think another community, and I'm going to be very frank and perhaps very vulnerable as well, is that I'm a parent of a child who is autistic, right? And my child needs significant high needs from public services. So imagine my difficulty in accessing the system as someone who is well-educated, who's born in the United States, and who speaks the language. And what happens for someone like me when I apply on my census form versus somebody who does not speak English, who lives in a low-income community, who is disabled themselves? Because it's hard enough for me to go to a PTA meeting with all of my ducks in a row, with childcare, with all of the programs and services to meet my needs, and I'm that ideal person. And most people in this country are not that ideal person, right? But through no fault of their own. This is not an issue of fault. This is an issue of the realities of people's lives. So for this census work to be effective, our strategies need to be cognizant of the realities and complexities of people's lives. And if it is not, I'm going to use very terse language, we will fail, right? And we cannot afford to fail any of our communities. Oh, thank you very much. But so I think in terms of that 0 to 5, and then also if you want to add on top of that, I think that's really significant and something that we sometimes do and don't talk about is the unique experience of Indigenous and Black people in the United States, right? Why there is no reason for Indigenous or Black communities to trust government.
Hey.
The track record in and of itself is very clear. So when you add, all these layers of the historical experience and the contemporary experience, because discrimination still exists, right? And then you add on top of that the hard to count realities and the economic realities, then our strategies must not only be about equality, but they must be equitable. As people who engage in these strategies from the hard to count and from the communities of color and from different community-based organizations working with the larger state organization, we really need to be thoughtful about the ways that we approach communities and expect them to engage in the census. Why would I, or why would a person who is African American or who is Native American who's lived in this country for as long as we've lived in this country, clearly different experiences, and have done our best work and worked hard and fought in wars even when we were not citizens, right? And built this country, what impetus is there for us to engage in the census when the statistics and the outcomes that we see are not positive for the most part? So I'm just putting that out there, not as something to think about in the ways that we really need to truly engage people in ways that will make them not only feel comfort, but for them to say, okay, I am invested in this. Because we all have to be invested in this effort.
So are there any tribes here or tribal organizations sitting in the audience? Siletz? Anybody else? Okay. So I think that's one example of a challenge, right? I think that tribal folks and even in urban organizations are definitely over capacity. Another example is homelessness. Over 50% of tribal folks live off the reservation. So we need to make sure that we're including people that are living in urban areas. And of course, folks that are living on reservation areas, in rural areas, a majority of my tribes are, they don't have residential addresses, physical addresses, so that's going to be, we're going to work really hard to make sure that they're included. The other piece is that tribal governments, we have a tribal government liaison program. I have tribal liaisons established in all of the reservation areas, and of course we have tribal partnerships in the urban areas. Of course, I'm just one person, so that's exactly why, hopefully you can listen and we can all help each other and make sure that all American Indian, Alaska Native folks are counted in Oregon. But tribal governments, each of the tribes in Oregon have different processes, different structures, different elections, right? So there's a lot of overturn. So that's been an example of some barriers that the Census Bureau's, had to deal with. A government liaison might leave their position, or somebody working in a GIS department when we're working on an boundary and annexation survey might leave their position. So it's really just trying to, constantly stay engaged with the tribe, and of course the other pieces around CBAMs, talking about apathy, fear, of course. A lot of tribal folks don't trust the government, and that's a real thing. So we do have to acknowledge that. So my role really is, as a tribal person, going into my own communities and educating and informing our folks of the facts and making sure people know how important it is to participate. So a lot of tribes are highly engaged right now. They are very excited about the Census Bureau, but of course we need other partners like We Count Oregon, to really reach everywhere. The Census Bureau can't do it alone, and so I'm happy to be here. There's more challenges, but I feel like being from the community, I understand a lot of those challenges, and I try my best to make sure that people feel safe and understand the importance of it. But we have a lot of work to do, and so my ask for you is to really help me and help us in the state of Oregon make sure that Native folks are counted and not undercounted for 2020. Thanks.
So sorry. My bad, Shayna. I am going to talk about something else. That's just how I rock. I think, listen, there are a lot of challenges. I think there are a lot of stories about Oregon and who we are as a people, who we are as a state. I think Oregon is also no longer that state, We have a real opportunity here. Yes, there's a lot of fear, there's apathy. We have an opportunity to paint a new picture of Oregon, one that's inclusive and diverse, people of color, immigrants, folks who speak other languages other than English, renters, homeowners, children, disabled folks, differently abled folks. And I feel like that is an opportunity that we can all get behind. I recently spoke to a group of folks and they said, well, would you give the same conversation, would you have the same conversation with a party? And I said, there is nothing more bread and butter American than the census. This is good for everyone. It doesn't matter if you live in a rural place or a city, if you're Black or Asian or Latinx, this is going to be good for all of us. And what is most important is to remember, hard to count communities are actually defined. They're defined as people who need additional in-person communication to turn out. Why I love the idea, and I know that there's so many great volunteers, some of you may be in the room, don't take it personal. There may be people who want to set up a table and they want to do some sort of passive activities, that's great. That's not how we get more people, more hard to count communities to take the census. The We Count Oregon has put together a strategy that uses traditional civic engagement methodology, including like auto dialer phone banks to contact 200,000 people. That's not knock 200,000 doors. It's not talk to, it's actually a real conversation to try and identify people and compel them. We're also doing that work in 10 different languages. Our website, is multilingual, and I think we also are trying to make democracy cool. This is a hard time to be, is a hard political context for most Oregonians and frankly most Americans. And the idea of safety and fear is connected to our understanding and relationship to government. And our campaign has taken it upon ourselves to make sure that our work is interesting, compelling, culturally relevant, and responsive. And we think that those are the keys to making sure that hard to count communities that we come in contact with are compelled, excited, and enthusiastic to be a part of this and the next phase, redistricting, or whatever else is happening in their community. And we get to that by working together, and we get to that by being strategic. So I'm excited that these amazing people are up on the stage also doing work in lots of different ways. But I hope that we can leave here feeling like our hope, our love for each other and this state is bigger than the fear.
Danielle, you wanted to...
So just following up a little bit of what she just said is that when Mr. Thompson was talking earlier about the disinformation campaign, right? So this is the thing I think that something that we should think about as a campaign is that, the holiday period between, December 15th and December 30th, whatever your religious or not religious background is, you're spending a lot of time eating a lot of food with people who you are forced to love because you're related to them, essentially, right? But, maybe you have an Uncle Harry and you're tired of Uncle Harry, so you're like, I'm going outside, right? You go outside and you're doing whatever you're doing, or you go to the basement and you have your smartphone, right? In that period of time between December 15th and December 30th, I think it would be incredible for the campaign to actually start to control the narrative and tell the true story of what's happening with the census, because that's a time where it's essentially people are laying fallow, right? So we've had the census since, 1790, right? So thankfully, a lot has changed in that time. But what hasn't changed is that bad news still travels fast. So this is an opportunity to actually turn the story around and control the narrative and control the story so people feel a little bit more confidence with accurate information. Because granted, when we come back to work January 2nd, January 3rd, the people who are fighting to make sure that disinformation happens will already have a toehold on the story, right? So I would say whoever's in the room who's a communications person, start working on it now and control that narrative between December 15th and December 30th, because we can only watch so much Die Hard and eat so much turkey. So.
All right, great. So I'm pledging to a new strategy when the cousins are annoyed with the same old family story and try to sneak out to the other room. I will talk to them about the census and the fundamental nature of the census in our democracy. So everyone can pledge that before you go back to second desserts. We'll have a conversation about the critical nature of the census. So we've made a great pivot at this moment to what do we do now? We know about the challenges. What is it that we can do? So along with messages and sort of key values that y'all are lifting up, what are some of these really specific methods? I think especially for folks who do have kind of overlapping vulnerabilities or issues that actually impact in their capacity to the task itself. How do you anticipate supporting and getting with folks in this kind of new internet era, filling out a survey?
Am I going? Yes, thank you. As Esperanza mentioned, hard to count folks, they need extra engagement, right? They need in-person engagement. And we've heard a lot about the fear, and we've heard a lot about the trust building. Our starting point at PELF is that Black people are the experts in their own lives. They don't need someone patronizing them. They don't need someone talking down to them. We have Black community leaders that are trusted. And so why are we not engaging with those folks? That's what we should be doing. So that's our strategy. We are using those trusted community members, and we are showing up where Black people are. They are at churches, and they're at schools, and they're at community gatherings. And in these spaces, education is key. We want to tackle misinformation, and we want to provide accurate and reliable information. And so I think if your starting point is building that trust and using the resources that you have, we anticipate huge success for this campaign. Thank you.
One of the reasons our organization has been able to be so successful is because of our ability to reinstill value in the community and seeing the value of the work. Each of us in here understand the value of the census, or else we wouldn't have taken the time out of our day to sit through an entire conference to learn more about the census. But that's not true for most community members. In fact, if they don't see how the census is going to benefit them, the chances of them taking the initiative to complete the application, submitting it, sending it out, making sure that their vote is counted is going to be very low. And so one of the things that we have to do is reinstill that value and make a direct connection on how this is going to benefit them. Because like any of us, if it doesn't benefit us, then why the heck are we going to do it? And just to talk a little bit about the disparities and some of the strategies that we're going to take to help families in rural Oregon to be counted is if we look at the demographics, right now it's about 40% Latino in specific counties on the high end. But if you look at the students in the school, some schools are upwards of almost 80% Latino, which is saying where the shift in the demographics is going to be and where our future is lying in diverse populations. The socioeconomic status, the median household income for some cities is $30,000. The median household income for the state of Oregon is $52,000. You want to talk about socioeconomic disparities? Let's talk about rural Oregon. 1 in 3 families and 1 in 3 households don't have access to broadband, meaning they can't even get the census via their email in a reliable way. There's whole municipalities and cities in rural Oregon who just use P.O. boxes. They don't even have an address for the home. Well, I mean, where they get property tax, but they don't get mail. And someone mentioned about disinformation. How about fraud protections? There's so much distrust because there's so many people taking advantage of good people that it makes it hard to distinguish who needs it and who doesn't. And so people just play it safe. And that's all people are doing. They want to help, but they don't because they're playing it safe. They don't want to get taken advantage of. And it doesn't matter who you are, nobody wants to get taken advantage of. And so the best way to get people involved, to establish that value, is have that one-on-one conversation and establish relationships. The reason that you put up with Pedro is because you have that established relationship. Sorry, Uncle Harry, which would be my Tío Pedro, is because we're willing to take the time and work through that relationships. If it was anybody else, something happens, I'm probably not going to talk to that person again. But that's just the nature of our society. We as a society need to start acting more like a family. It's like, yeah, we're going to disagree. Yeah, we're going to fight. Yeah, we're going to do things we may not like. But we should be able to hug it out 5 minutes later, understand perspectives, and even agree to disagree. And so when we're working out the community, the only way that can establish that value is develop relationships, which means face-to-face contact, going door to door, not creating forums, not creating spaces where we're distributing information via media, because how many of you actually open up that newsletter you get from that organization you subscribe to? Man, I lost my breath on that one. But again, that goes back to the established relationship. When you donate to an organization, you donate because you see the value, you see the work, and you are committed to that organization. Same thing with census. And so the best thing that we can do as individuals, especially if you're in government, you have a really a real investment because it's going to prevent government cuts. which means loss of jobs for folks if we don't get the resources. But more importantly, being able to use those positions as an asset to get community members what they need and access to their services and the resources, which means government has to be the friend of the people.
So I've got to choose your own adventure for you. At the high level, I know, Amanda, if you can wave, and there's other United Way staff, they have opened up an RFP for Census Assistance Center. Cannot say that 5 times fast. But the CAC network will help us provide the reach that field may not. So please go to their website, check out that RFP, put in for that. Because as Michael said, I want my slice of the meringue pie. Because if we don't get our slice of the meringue pie, cities are going to have to solve that shortfall. Counties are going to have to figure out how to, right? And we're limited here in our state with so many throttles. There's only so many toggles that we have left for taxing, right? For increasing resources. So we really need to get those federal dollars that are rightfully ours for the folks that are here on April 1, 2020. 2, get plugged in with an organization that is one of the 13 anchor organizations in the Hard to Count. We, for example, as Apano, has the Norman Mineta Leadership Institute training this Saturday from 9 to 3. We'll provide food, we'll provide translation. It's free registration. If you are serving an API population, Native Hawaiians included, please, registration, we're extending it. And third, if you want to take the Danielle path and want to, take a break from Uncle Harry or Pedro, we as OCCC will be launching a website. Please write this down, this URL. It's going to be launched. A soft launch at the end of the year, but fully functional in the new year, Oregon2020census.gov. So that way when you, make amends with Uncle Harry when you go back into the room, you can send them to that and they'll have all the toolkits, all the resources, because we know we all have jobs, we all have kids, we all have, daily lives. We don't expect you to be the expert, but at least there's a toolkit for you to turn and have resources to offer for folks. Thank you.
Oregon2020census.gov.
Yes. So I just wanted to add that it seems that in this case, right, the myth of rugged individualism falls down when your bridges and your schools and your hospitals are inadequate, right? And so in Oregon, we live in a state where we talk a lot about this rugged individualism, but it's actually not the case because everybody lives in a community, no matter how big or how small. So some of the strategies I think that we can employ and the opportunities that are available to us, one in particular is that in May of 2019, the Oregon legislature passed the Student Success Act, which is the first of its kind $1 billion yearly investment in our schools from early education through 12th grade. And so for the benefit of that act to be realized, we really need to make an important connection with the census, right? Because we can have this money, but the money is based on the current population that we have. So if we don't accurately match the population that's coming to the money that we're actually going to be using, this money's not going to go as far as we need it to go. So that's something that that early education, K-12, and higher education need to work together on in this strategy for the OCCC. And then another strategy, I think, as well, is that for us in the early childhood community, Children's Institute, we actually are the conveners of an early childhood coalition for the state of Oregon, which is over 30 organizations statewide, and it's of providers and Head Start and our early learning hubs. And one thing that has actually been incredibly useful is that, shockingly enough, I am actually a rural engagement person. So when I head out to rural Oregon and I show up looking as I do, I attract a lot of attention. And that actually has been incredibly helpful because that's actually helped us to make inroads in communities where there is a lot of fear of government. And I'm talking particularly about white communities where there is a lot of fear of government. And shockingly enough, as a black person, I can walk into a white small town and people feel a lot more comfortable with me than they do with a white person coming in from Portland or from Salem. And when you build individual and community relationships with people that are authentic and they are not transactional, you can actually help make change. And it's not change from the government perspective, but it's change driven from people when you understand their needs and you co-create solutions with them. So I think the real key to this census and the movement that we're trying to build to make sure that people fill out their census forms and are engaged is building authentic, long-term relationships where we develop solutions that are co-created by the people who are directly affected. That's the only way that this is going to be successful. And that's across all hard-to-count communities and the ways in which they overlap and interplay.
What was the question? It was like just listening so hard. Okay, so it was along the lines of what can we do now moving forward? Okay, so I think the biggest thing that I would say is there needs to be more education around the government-to-government relationship with tribal governments and nations. I think that's been also one of the other barriers, and understanding that, and that tribes are set up uniquely. And so that's also why we do have tribal partnership specialists. We have 11 that cover the whole region, the LA region. So I cover 2 states, but we are under a unique program, the American Indian and Alaska Native program within the Census Bureau. And that's given in due part because the tribal consultation process, tribal leaders over the years and a lot of the historical briefing and process with the U.S. Census Bureau relationship, has been rocky, of course. And so we work hard to make sure that we are building those relationships and making sure that we're good partners. So it's really important to understand that, and that when we are talking about how to support tribes with the state of Oregon, whether it be a nonprofit, understanding the unique relationship for one is important, because each tribe will have, how we're structured, each tribe will have a designated tribal liaison designated by the tribal council or the highest tribal leader. So there's structures already in place similar to the state of Oregon's OCCC. We have TCCC's, tribal complete count committees, that are in place. For instance, at Siletz, Grand Ronde, a lot of the tribes have these structures in place already. And so again, it's, can't go, I'm not saying go out to tribes and say, hey, let's make sure you're counted. It's really understanding that there's a very specific process when it comes to tribal governments. And of course, right now, the state and We Count Oregon, we're all pretty well engaged with tribes and off-reservation folks. And so that's good. But yeah, I think moving forward, making sure that you understand that, and that the fact is we want to make sure we don't have an undercount. I'm happy to talk with anybody about how maybe you can help, but I think we're all here to provide a resource. But tribes are there. They're gearing up right now. They have resources, thankfully, from the state of Oregon and taxpayer dollars, and even their own resources. And if anyone knows how to do a lot with a little bit of resources, it's tribal folks. So we can do a lot. And the last thing is that I wanted to say that one of the good things about the 2020 census is that news, good gossip spreads fast throughout Indian country. So regardless if it's on the East Coast or the West Coast, we're very organized in that way, where people, for instance, we just had a tribal consultation down in Albuquerque for the National Congress of American Indians, and we had our Census Bureau staff there. People talk, so all of that information, everyone's talking about how important the 2020 census is, and so it's good for us, but we still got to make sure that we're providing a lot of resources and a lot of the most up-to-date information to tribes. And so but yeah, thank you for the time.
Great, so I'm going to give you some concrete and specific strategies that the We Count Oregon campaign is using. As I've said, we are partnering with 12 organizations. I'm just going to give them a quick shout out. These are 13 partners. These are our anchor organizations: Apano, which she mentioned, Oregon Futures Lab, PALF, GAUSA, Evalkyrie, Our Oregon, Unite Oregon, East County Rising, NEA, Latino Network, Forward Together, Pacoon, and Cat Action. And these organizations, as we've already said, already have established and trusted relationships in communities. And working with a paid team, each organization having paid team, we intend to employ somewhere around 310 people paid at $17 an hour or more if they're multilingual, to contact 200,000 people over a 100-day period campaign. We will also partner with 100 organizations, so if you're interested in figuring out how to get trained and how to be part of our We Count Oregon campaign, we'd love to do that and talk with you about it. Mandy is going to raise her hand right now, and you can come talk to her after that about how to become a partner. We're also going to train 10,000 people. So with the beautiful help of our CECs, we have currently a list of about 13 day-long summits that will happen all across the country and 4 different constituencies. We'll have a youth summit, a Latino summit, maybe 2 or 3. Eastern Oregon's like us too. We will have one in Southern Oregon, in Bend, in Eugene. So again, we're really trying to figure out how to engage statewide, and trainings will be about 250 to 500 people a piece. So looking to train 10,000 people who can go out and replicate this work. Listen, just us in this room are not going to get 4 million people counted. And so we're looking to figure out how to train and support people to get out and talk knowledgeably about the census. The last is a program we have called Text to Count, and we would love for you to join it right now. You're welcome to pull out your cell phone. No, pull it out. Pull out your cell phone. I know some of you have been looking at it. I'm watching you. I've been watching some of you on your cell phone already. This is a great opportunity. And you're going to text the word Oregon to 33339, 33339, and follow the link. And you can pledge to take the census, and that will mean that you opt to continue to be engaged in this process after the campaign is over. This process of creating a real democracy, and we will give you alerts about trainings, about work opportunities. If you want to be one of the people who gets paid to do this work at $17 an hour, you will receive. Don't worry, we don't text you too much, but you'll receive texts about upcoming events. I think the last thing I'll say is that our work is multilingual, and so you can expect for us to be reaching out to people in at least 14 languages. 33339. 33339. I need to make a song, I'm not sure. But 33339, text the word Oregon, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I can attest there will not be too many text messages. I have signed up for this text message service at the behest of Ray because it's about relationships and your friendships and the people that you know. I want to really thank the panel. I think what we've heard is some really important information about the importance of this work, but also the importance of these partnerships, this engagement. This isn't an engagement that is once every 10 years. Pop in, say, hey, fill out this form, and peace out. This is about building a longer-term partnership, rebuilding trust and engagement within communities, treating them as a family, and getting folks reconnected into government or connected into government for the first time, showing them that this is how we can hold our government accountable to communities who haven't seen all of the benefits. So we've heard these amazing messages, and I want to thank each of the panelists, thank all of you, and please do go to Oregon2020census.gov later this year, texting 33339 Oregon, and use all of the resources of this amazing set of folks and the organizations connected to our We Count. Thank you so much.